Good afternoon. It's good to see you. I'm Andy Rich. I'm the Dean of the Colin Powell School, and I want to welcome you to the Rick and Susan Goings Conversations in Leadership. Today, it's a conversation about finding your voice in spite of fear, and we are honored to have Cristina Jiménez Moreta with us as our speaker. The Colin Powell School is the School of Social Sciences here at City College, and we're also the home to the public service and the leadership development programs of the college. We're now the biggest division of City College, about 4,000 students. And the way we see our mission is as working to transform the world's most diverse student body into tomorrow's global leaders. It's this big, heady mission. And it's a mission that came to us from our namesake and the person who was our leader until he passed, General Colin Powell, who himself graduated from City College 1958 and went on to become the first Black American to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first Black American to be the chairman, the director of the National Security Council, and the first Black American to be U.S. Secretary of State. And when he finished his service to the country, he came back for the last 20 years of his life to City College, and he helped us create this school, and he brought enormous amount of resources to bear on our mission. One of the things he did was bring his friends to the school, and this series is in some ways a product of that project that he engaged in with us. He brought Rick and Susan Goings to find out about this place. Rick is the chairman emeritus of Tupperware Brands, and Susan is the chairperson and co-founder of the World Youth Federation of Youth Clubs. And the two of them were quite taken with our mission, with our purpose, and they made it possible for us to have a series that brings extraordinary leaders from different sectors to the college to talk about their path. And the distinctive quality that kind of links together some of the people that we've had as speakers is that in every case, their path to leadership was, in some respects, at least, unexpected. And so what was it about their journeys, many times journeys that seem similar to the journeys that you all as our students are on, that can resonate for how we understand what's possible, the kind of change you can make in our world? So that's what this series is. Now, this is the first time in this series that I get to moderate a conversation. Very excited about that. And I'm particularly excited because I'm not somebody kind of who goes around talking about anyone as a hero. But in this case, I have to say the person who is our speaker is in every sense a hero to me. She is someone who has truly transformed our society and who inspires me. And I have to say, grateful to have the chance now for her to be our colleague here at City College. Cristina Jiménez Moreta is now a distinguished lecturer here at the Colin Powell School at City College in the Department of Anthropology and Interdisciplinary Programs. She, though, is a hero because she built a movement to transform the rights of undocumented Americans. And she did it against every odd. And I think you'll learn about this today. She changed policy, she changed minds, and she changed our society in so many meaningful ways for the better. She is the co-founder and the former executive director of United We Dream, the organization that built the movement for DACA in this country and really built a youth movement of immigrant leaders, thousands, many thousands strong, with millions working in the movement. She was named at a very young age one of the most influential people in the United States by Time magazine. She was named a MacArthur Genius Award. Now let me explain what a MacArthur Genius Award is. We call them MacArthur Genius Awards, and Cristina may well be a genius. But it's an award that recognizes someone with extraordinary leadership talent and potential at an early midpoint in their life with recognition, frankly, probably first and foremost, because to be named MacArthur Genius Award, we're talking, what, maybe 20 people a year who get this recognition. You also get a truckload of money that you can use to make a difference. And the idea is that that money can support you and support your work to make a difference. To get that at a young age, to get that in the face of the struggles that our speaker has had and the struggle she has overcome on behalf of the country is quite extraordinary. So we are thrilled that she is here for Conversations in Leadership. Thrilled that she is now our colleague. Please join me in welcoming Cristina Jiménez Moreta.
Hello, everyone. So good to see every single one of you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for that amazing introduction, Dean.
Well, thanks for being here. So one of the things we do in these conversations is we talk a lot about your origin story, you know, kind of what life was like growing up, how you found your path, and how you found your voice. So you were born in Ecuador. Tell us about your childhood in Ecuador and what brought your family to the United States.
Yeah, I was born in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and I come from a working class family. My mom was the daughter of Esther and Carlos, my dad of Julia and another Carlos. And they all came from working class backgrounds. So unfortunately, both of my parents were really financially responsible for their families at a young age, and they had dreams of a college education, of what they always talked about as being, someone in life. But they didn't have that support. My dad, unfortunately, grew up homeless for most of his childhood. And my mother came from a family that was very traditional, where the little bit of resources that the family had were prioritized for the men in the family and not the women in the family. So early on, she was told she couldn't get a college education. And so they had big dreams about their kids, that they will have a different life. And unfortunately, in the 1990s, as a result of economic crisis, political instability in Ecuador, the banks took people's savings and left the country, leaving a lot of people without their life savings, including people like my parents. And the instability led to a lot of employers either shutting down and unemployment increasing. And so we found ourselves in a place where we had to make choices as a family of whether we could pay for rent or pay for food, and much worse, even think about being able to pay for an education. So finding themselves really at the brink of poverty, my family decided to come and take the very difficult decision to leave everything behind, their family, their home, everything they knew, and came to the United States, I think, as many refugees and migrants have come over time, seeking a better life and hoping that in this country they'll have the opportunity for their kids to have what they did not have. And believing truly in the promise of this country and the promise of opportunity, of freedom, of equality. And we came here in 1998 when I was a 13-year-old, seeking a better life, when we settled here with a family that had come in the 80s for similar reasons and settled in Queens.
And what was it like for you, 13 years old, in a new country, in New York City, in Queens? How did you settle in? What were your, if you can remember this, kind of what were your first impressions, and what did it take for you to feel comfortable?
So for many of us immigrant kids who grew up watching a lot of American movies, the thing that I thought about New York was always the skyscrapers and the tall buildings, and I was really excited to get to see that. And we were fortunate enough, my family and I, to have a visa to come in, and so we were able to come with a visa. And I remember, Andy, landing at LaGuardia Airport and just thinking I was fooled. I saw no tall buildings. I was like, where are they? Where is the Empire State Building that I saw in the movies? So I was a little bit disappointed when we got here. And immediately when I saw my family members, I said, can you take me to see those buildings, please? But I'll start by saying that getting used to a new place is difficult. Even if you may hold in your heart and in your soul the dream and the aspiration of opportunity and knowing that we were here for the purpose of just having a better life. The language was an issue. None of us spoke the language. and getting used to how New York moves really fast. But I will say that one of the things that was really striking for me at LaGuardia is to just see the diversity. Somehow I had imagined, but this is, I think, sometimes the picture that the country had, at least at the time, of that I was gonna come here and see a lot of gringos, like a lot of white people, a lot of people that look like Andy. And then I get to the airport.
Thankfully, she didn't.
And I get to the airport and I see, people from, I felt like I was walking through the United Nations. Like people from all over the country, all over the world, all colors. And I just remember feeling, wow, this is just unexpected and amazing, because part of it made me feel not as isolated and different. And growing up in the neighborhoods of Elmhurst and Jackson Heights with a lot of Asian communities, Muslim communities, Latin American communities, and people from all kinds of backgrounds, was just such a blessing for me, because it really, the experience that I had was not only learning about a new country, but learning about all kinds of countries, all kinds of people. And to me, that really expanded my heart, my love for people from everywhere, my appreciation of people's cultures and people's dreams and people's experiences. And despite all the differences, and I went to Newton High School, which it was predominantly and continues to be a predominantly immigrant school. The one thing that brought us all together was our family's struggle to flee from X country and to come here with dreams and aspirations of a better life, and truly believing in the promise of values of equity, freedom, and opportunity that this country is known for. And I think that the hardest part for me, Andy, was being heartbroken about realizing the contradictions between those aspirations and those values and what many people think of it as the American dream, and realizing that that was not 100% true in my own life.
Yeah. Do you mind speaking about that? And you have many times before, I know, about coming to understand that you were undocumented, coming to understand what it meant to be undocumented, and what the consequences of that might be for you. And maybe alongside that, you describe going to a school where it was the children of a lot of immigrants who, and their parents had dreams for them. And I wondered how you navigated the dreams your parents had for you and when you started to have dreams for yourself.
Such a good question. I think growing up and knowing that we were undocumented, I knew I was undocumented, I know my family was undocumented. You always have, and I grew up with the fear in the back of my head all the time of, what if people find out? What if the police finds out somehow? What if immigration agencies find out somehow? But what if my teachers find out? Will they like me? Will they still support me? What about my friends? Will they still be my friends? And the conversation about immigrants and refugees has been so dehumanizing. Historically, and I think it's important to say, something that I understand now I didn't know then, is how much of our immigration discourse and immigration system is rooted in white supremacy and systematic racism. And so the conversation about immigrants is often one that dehumanizes us to such a level that I felt like I had to hide it in fear that I will be called a criminal for being undocumented. Because that's the discourse. So all of a sudden, if a friend finds out, will they call me, will they think I'm a criminal? Would I have to tell them I'm not? So you're a high schooler and you're thinking about these things. But I will say that fear, and that you mostly, and for me, I speak for myself, but I know that it's true for many undocumented young people, is that you grow with it in silence, and often in isolation. And it wasn't until September 11 happened, and I was a senior in high school, where the fear in the back of my head that we will be somehow caught, that we could end up, in deportation proceedings, that became just more real. Because it was such a painful moment of, for our country, for our city. And it was both a moment of feeling like, I love this place so much, and also I feel not wanted in this place so much. Because so much of the conversation was, if you were considered a foreign, you were immediately considered a threat. And the fight on terrorism, in addition to trying to address threats of terrorism, really became a threat and a fight against immigrants too, where we all became, at that point, the terrorist. Until today, we're continued to change and try to change many of the systems that were put in place in response to 9/11 that criminalize immigrants and refugee communities. But when you are hearing that ICE cars are in the neighborhood, that all of a sudden your Muslim neighbors are missing, and the last time that we saw them was when we saw an immigration ban that came into the neighborhood, you start thinking, this can be me next. My family can be next. And that's when the fear that, it's always sort of looming became just more real to me. And then the trickle effect on policies. Because the thing that brings me to even share with my first time, with my teacher for the first time that I was undocumented, is because right after 9/11, again, the fight against terrorism also becomes an implementation of policies that target immigrant and refugee communities and communities of color, targeting Muslims first, but eventually impacting all of us. And tuition access for undocumented students was removed from the City University of New York. So even though I was, so excited to go to college, I had done everything that my teachers told me to do, the high school experience, community service, and honor classes, and AP classes, and you try to put your portfolio to be a strong candidate for college. I had done all of that. But as a result of all these policies and the climate that became so anti-immigrant, my college advisor said to me, I can't help you. You're undocumented. You can't go to college. And the City University of New York removes the opportunity for undocumented students to be able to have access to higher education, or not the opportunity, but the right. And the state also removes access to driver's licenses to undocumented people. So all of these things are happening at the same time that just made for me, really clear the contradiction between the values of freedom, equity, opportunity, and the American dream, with really feeling like you're in a nightmare of being persecuted, of living in fear, and not feeling truly safe. And that even when you did all the right things, right? Even when people think, well, I'm not a bad immigrant, I'm a good immigrant, or I'm not a criminal, oh, I'm not a terrorist, so it's all about those people, not me. The reality is that it didn't matter that I was a good immigrant. It didn't matter that I had done all the right things, because even then, systematically and as a society, we had made sure that people, even though that had done everything right per se, or become the good student, that even those folks will be impacted by these policies. And so you kind of realize it doesn't matter how good you are, you cannot escape systematic racism and systematic discrimination.
So how did you, that could be enough to hold somebody back and to say, throw in the towel, at least for the moment, and say, I'm not going to pursue my dreams. You didn't do that. And I wonder if you can move us forward. Tell us what you did instead and how you found your way both to college and to becoming a leader on campus first and then beyond.
Yeah. Well, I tell the story a little bit of my mom, really, because once this college advisor said to me, you can't go, and I'm someone who trusts my teachers, who looks up to them, who trust them that they will watch out for me, that they're invested in my future, in my success. And so when she tells me I can't go, I believe her. So I'm heartbroken, and I go back home crying, and I tell my mom, our dream that I will be the first one in our family to get a college education is just not going to be possible. This is what my college advisor told me. And she, I remember, put her hands on her hip and looked at me like, this is not the time to give up. Like, are you gonna let her say this to you without pushing back? And she said, you know, if you don't go back to school, I will go there myself. And I'll talk to the teacher, the principal, whoever I need to talk to. And as a teen, the idea that my mom will embarrass me in high school was enough to move me to action. And to say, like, no worries, Mom. Actually, I'll go myself, and I'll find another teacher that maybe could find a way for me to figure this out. And in fact, I went to Ms. Berkowitz, who was my advisor for the Key Club, and she helped me fill out my CUNY application, and that's how I ended up going to Queens College. But you know, the lesson from my mom's story and what she pushed me to do and she agitated me to do is really to speak up in a moment of injustice, to push our institutions who are meant to support us and to serve students, in this case, to be accountable to their student population and to not let them close their doors, and to push them to be true to their mission. And so it was the first time that I felt like speaking up and fighting for what I thought the institution needed to do for me and for many other students like me. It was the first step into a journey of, you know, activism. But I will say what really transformed my life and became a moment of courage, and you know, the title of our talk, of finding my voice in spite of the fear that I had, is that post 9/11, we start seeing a lot of young people, many of them CUNY students, many of them that were targeted by the special registration program, which was targeted at Muslim young people that were required to register with the government. And I see young people like me who are in deportation, and they're trying to fight their cases. And so for the first time, I joined a campaign to keep Kamala Saheb, who's an alumni of CUNY, and Marie Gonzalez from Missouri, who were some of the first deportation cases of young people, of young undocumented young people that, you know, brought some national and media attention. And I was one of the people behind those campaigns, calling representatives, organizing rallies. And when we were able to keep both of them here, I realized the power that one person can have when we speak up, when we expose the injustice, and when we take action to create change. But I also realized that even though I had a lot of fear about, you know, sharing that I was undocumented or even taking action, if this time was Kamal and Marie, next time could be me. I could be the one that could be also facing deportation. And what would I want people around me to do when that happens? And if that could happen, what do I have to lose? That really became my, you know, internal agitation and that moment of choice, that I knew that the next person could be me, it could be my family, and that I had nothing to lose by speaking up and taking action and trying to do some work to change the situation.
So this moment in your life seems particularly important for understanding for our students. And I'll say something, you know, one of the reasons why it's so meaningful to me is we teach a course, several of us here together, to new students to City College about the history of student power at City College, to help people realize that this institution has been reshaped every generation by our students, not by us, the administrators, but by students making demands on this institution to do better. And while they're doing it, they're often making demands on our society, because we've often been a leader in higher education and in other ways, I think, in our society for being on the front end of change. And that's what you were doing. I wonder how, when you're in the midst of it and just learning it as you go, I mean, it's interesting you use the language of a campaign, and you might even explain what a campaign is, because I don't know that for a lot of people that's a common term for what you would be doing. But I wonder, did you know, this notion of finding your power or realizing I had power because you were able to make change, who had your back at that time? You know, who besides you, who on Queens College campus or beyond, how did it all kind of come together?
It was truly students and faculty, which is why for me it's such a full circle to be back at CUNY and to be giving back to this community that gave me so much as a young undocumented student. Because when the reason why the policy at the state level changes, allowing undocumented students to pay equal tuition fees as any other resident of the state, is because undocumented students from CUNY and faculty created a campaign, meaning many of them impacted, came up forward and started talking to the media and organized rallies on campuses around CUNY, faculty from PSC supporting the students. They came together to also file a lawsuit to try to change the law. And I remember reading newspapers and watching on TV, students is speaking out and saying, I'm undocumented, this is what's happening, this is the impact of this policy, and thinking, I want to be like them. I need to connect with those students. And what they were doing was a campaign. They saw something that was injustice, that it was impacting their lives. People who could really speak about the impact in their lives came together, built a community, built a team, and they started activating community around them. They found allies, faculty and others who came together and supported that call. And that is the reason why in 2002, the state changes the law and allows undocumented students like me and others to pursue higher education. Years later, it's the same student activism here in CUNY and across the state that also pushes the state to pass the first DREAM Act in the state. So I will say truly, it is the allies, it is the support of faculty that, when I came out as undocumented for the first time, it was faculty and friends from CUNY that were there to support me, that were there to give me a hug, that were there to say, we're here with you. And that support that you get from community is so critical to not feel alone, but to also feel like when you're taking action, you're doing it together.
So you went on from Queens College, or maybe it was while you're at Queens College, and you started to build a national movement. And United We Dream is an extraordinary organization of movement activists, youth leaders who have been at the forefront of the efforts to fight for immigrant rights. Tell us about that. Tell us your path to United We Dream and what it meant to become a national leader and how it happened.
What I think it's really important to name is that as a result of the anti-immigrant wave of attacks post 9/11, what you saw was a very vibrant movement led by immigrant communities, Muslim communities, refugee communities, that started to push back against deportations, fighting against deportations like Marie and Kamal as an example, pushing states to protect the rights of immigrants and refugees. And in this moment in history, as your immigrant communities are facing so much attack, the beautiful thing is that there's a response, and that response is communities coming together and a lot of young people getting involved in their campuses, in local organizations. So in New York, you had many undocumented students from CUNY that created the first undocumented group. I just saw Daniela, who's one of the original members, leaders of the YLC, the Youth Leadership Council, who's in this room. And so across the country, you see a lot of young people coming together in colleges, right, in California, in UCLA, and all of this is happening in partnership with faculty, with a lot of support from faculty, student organizations, but also community organizations. So in this vibrant moment of young people coming together, we connect with each other around these deportation cases. And at the time we didn't have the Zoom, but we had free conference call numbers that we use. And we will come together across the country on those conference calls. And it was in those conference calls that the idea of creating a national space where young people wouldn't feel alone and isolated like many of us had, but that we had a place where we could be community, where we could support each other. And in addition to that, be able to fight deportations if we had to, since many of us were being targeted. That became the dream. So we started talking about how create a community of support, but also because we have led advocacy efforts for the DREAM Act for so many years, and every time, the bill at the federal government, which aims to provide an access to a green card and eventual citizenship, even though it had bipartisan support, even though it continues to be one of the policies on immigration that has the highest level of support, it hasn't passed. And so every year we pushed for the policy, it failed, and we just didn't want to be defined by a policy. We wanted to make sure that we had a sustainable movement of young people that will be able to find our voice, build community, and take action in their communities and nationally. And United We Dream comes out of that dream. And that vision for our country where immigrants and refugee communities can live without fear and with dignity. And we created the organization in 2008 with the aim, and our main campaign was to push for the DREAM Act, which became the thing that brought us together. But we knew, again, that we weren't really limited by policy, and that the bigger vision of dignity and freedom for immigrants was what kept us together.
And tell us a little bit about the infrastructure that it required for United We Dream to work, and how you would work at state levels, at the national level, and then ultimately achieve DACA, and maybe tell folks what that is. And by the way, as I ask her this question, I want to mention we're going to open it up in just a couple of minutes for your questions, so please start to think about what questions you might like to ask.
So when this dream comes together, we bring together all of the student groups that had self-organized, many of them inspired by many undocumented young people sharing their stories, declaring that we are undocumented and unafraid. And we start with like 30 chapters across the country, and we convene people in North Carolina, in Kentucky. And as we're pushing for the DREAM Act to pass in Congress, we have a group of courageous young people in Florida, Gavi Pacheco, Felipe, and others, who decide to lead a walk from Florida to Washington, D.C. to bring attention to the plight of undocumented communities. So the network of the United We Dream really becomes a hub. And I'm teaching my class right now on immigrant youth movement, and I name it for our students what becomes a movement hub, right? Like where you have spaces where groups are strategizing. We are also training people. People are building community and supporting each other. And we're also building support for this campaign and mobilizing people to call their members of Congress, to have meetings with members of Congress. So all of these groups come together to fight for the DREAM Act, but the DREAM Act fails for the first time in an official vote in 2010. And it was short 5 votes because of the filibuster that we have in the Senate. And both parties were responsible for the failure of that vote. And instead of, per se, that moment breaking our movement or even the organization, what ends up happening is that we really come back with more strength and motivation, and what we think about the strategy changes. We know that Congress may not be able to move with the votes to pass the DREAM Act, but we know that President Obama had campaigned on his support for the DREAM Act and undocumented communities, and that he was also working to be reelected. And so we really made the issue of undocumented young people being targeted by deportation and the failure for the DREAM Act a campaign conversation, a campaign debate, and we end up choosing. And this is where the strategy, created a lot of controversy in the bigger immigrant justice movement. But we decide to choose, we choose to put the pressure on the president to make a decision on DACA. And after 2 years of relentless campaigning and reminding the administration that they had the power to stop the deportations of young people, the administration met our demand, and they created the DACA program in 2012. And I will say that, coming from a group that had like 30-something groups, all of a sudden DACA happens and everybody's eyes is on the organization. And so now all of a sudden everybody knows who we are. and the capacity or the infrastructure changes because a lot of support was able to be brought in, but we were also responsible for bringing that victory to the community. So we went into community clinics to help young people apply for DACA, and that brought in a lot of members. And so the organization went from, thousands of members to over 1 million members in the last couple of years as a result of the implementation of our victory, which was DACA.
Which is amazing. Tell us what it was like for you to be the center of this. To all of a sudden be someone who's recognized nationally as a movement leader, and even, as I said in the introduction, to be named one of Time Magazine's most influential people, to win this MacArthur Genius Award. What was it like for you to contend with that kind of attention?
It's hard and it's great for two reasons. Like, it's hard because I think we have a fascination in our culture to make stories about like the one person that did something. And if there's anything that you take away from my story is that it was many of us that built this movement, that built the organization, hundreds of leaders over the years, that to even get to the victory of DACA, it took more than a decade of movement building work. And so when moments like that happened, Andy, for me it was a moment to recognize not just Cristina, who's having this role in the movement, but it was a moment to recognize the hard work of all young people that have been working for this for many years. And to be honest with you, also a recognition of our parents, because all of us come from families. And so to me, all of these opportunities were a moment to bring light to all of us that have been working to create change, of our parents that had sacrificed so much, that they may not be the ones leaving or tasting what it's like to have opportunity, but that some of us are getting to because of their sacrifice in some way. And so it was really an opportunity to bring back a light to the sacrifices of immigrant parents, but also that it was many of us and that it was allies. And so for me, it was always an opportunity to seize the media attention in many ways, to be able to tell the bigger story. But more than anything, I will say, I will close with this, that stories like this, to me, are critical to make sure that young people in this country and across the globe get to understand the power that they have, get to really love themselves for who they are, get to really find their voice, and to see in others, perhaps, the courage and the actions and how that can inspire them to bring change. So for me, it was always an opportunity to create more Cristinas in the country and across the globe.
So let me ask you then one last question, and then we're going to open it up, which is directly relevant to this that you're saying, which is, a lot of the students in this room, I think, want to be part of a project of creating social change. And what is the lesson? What are some lessons from your life that you might share? And aligned with that, you've several times in this conversation talked about the contradictions of this country, the tensions of the dream and what it could be and what you found when you got here and had to live it. And I think we're living in a moment in which many of our students are contending with those same issues, the disappointments that it feels they can have towards this country and some of its policies and some of its behaviors, at the same time as it's a place you call home and you're proud of. And how would you advise them to contend with that, and how did you find your way in doing that?
20 years later, I will say that one of my most important reflections, at least speaking from the experience of being an immigrant and a woman of color in this country, in a racist country, like I think that, for my experience, is first and foremost, there's so much in our culture and our institutions that tell people like me that I don't belong, that I don't deserve to be here. And I think particularly after 9/11, I felt not wanted, and as if people wanted to expel me and other people from this country. And the reality is that there's some people out there who still believe that and feel that strongly. And what I found to be really important is to first reject those lies and really love yourself. And understanding that you are worthy, no matter where you're from. You're worthy of a life with dignity, and you're worthy of a life where you can thrive and live without fear. And if we truly believe that for ourselves, I think that that's an important grounding. Because then we will do the work to make sure that that's true for you and for other people and for all people. So what I will say is, first, love yourself. Believe that you're worthy of dignity and freedom. The second thing is that you're not alone. A lot of people agree with you. But if we don't speak up, if we don't share, if we don't build community with others, you will never find out. So find your community. And know that a lot of these systems of injustice and oppression work together. So sometimes it's easy to say, well, for this particular policy, they're talking about Black communities, not about me. Or they're talking about, in the case of 9/11, terrorists, but not about me. And what I have understood over the years is that all of these systems and policies work together. That an injustice for one group actually allows for injustice for all of us. And when we understand that, then I think we make that connection. And when we speak up, we're really speaking for ourselves, but for all communities that are experiencing some kind of oppression. So when you connect all of that and realize that if you speak up and you can take action, and there is even small groups of committed people that speak up and take action can create change. And we see that through the stories of many movements. I was inspired very much by the civil rights movement, by the AIDS movement in this country, and that's the thing that I will want young people to remember, that we can change things. And when we look at, DACA, which is the most significant victory that we've seen in immigration policy in the last 35 years, it was because of the courage of young people. So, the last thing to your question, Andy, how do we reconciliate the contradictions about the dreams and aspirations that the country evokes and what happens and what we see happening around us and in our communities and in the world? And I think for my own experience, what I want to remember is that in this country, I experienced the most discrimination and racial hatred that I've ever experienced in my life. And I've also experienced the love and the courage of communities fighting for justice. And I learned that from the movements and communities here in the US. So I hold both. And I think that it should be okay to be able to hold that tension, to recognize what's wrong with the country and where we could do better and what needs to be changed, and to recognize that there's also a lot of people that are on the side of change and of justice and wanting for this country to really be true to those values. And the reason why that makes sense for me is because, my husband was detained and almost deported. And if it wasn't for people who did not even know him or us, we wouldn't be here. And I have now our son, he's 18 months old. The story of my family in this country wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for people from all across backgrounds who came together to say, this is a moment of injustice, and we're gonna fight to keep Walter here and protect him from deportation because this is his home. So that's what I hold about this country, the possibility of us being able to do good while also recognizing what's wrong, and to realize that, it is because of that community, because of those people in this country that have taken action for change, that my story is even possible here.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Daniel and Ari have microphones, so just put your hand up and here we go.
Thank you so much, Cristina, for sharing, and thanks, Dean Andy. I mean, This is very inspiring and very moving because I think many of us, I personally relate a lot to what you're saying. And I have a question that comes also always inside classrooms. Has to do with our career and the different hats we can wear in order to make a change. So you moved from being a young student at Queen College then into a movement which is very precarious, as we know. What does it mean to be into a movement and only an activist, right? And then moving to be founding an organization, a nonprofit, and then now as a professor, right? So what holds you into those different positions, and how did you deal with those different moments moving from one hat to another? Thank you, Cristina, so much.
You know, I really appreciate this question because sometimes I get asked the question, how do you choose to be a leader? How do you choose to open a nonprofit? Tell us about that process. And what I say to people often is, you know, a lot of these things, they don't really come, I think, by like a sort of conscious choice. In fact, like my parents still dream of me becoming a lawyer, and I still get the question, when am I going to go to law school? You know, immigrant parents, sometimes like really, it's either medical school or law school for many of them, right? And so they kind of ingrained in my head that I needed to make it to law school. And that was first sort of like the role or like the thing that I thought that I needed to accomplish. But, you know, that the movement and the work and the experiences of being undocumented really transformed what that definition was. And for me, it was really survival. If I did not speak up and become an activist, I could be the next target. And I could be deported, or my family could be deported. And so it's not really like a career choice. It was really survival at the beginning. And then, you know, over time, I will say that the question about what's my purpose, what do I value the most? And what are the skills that I have that can be really, you know, helpful? And so at the beginning, I think, you know, to the question of roles, I feel like I just took a lot of lead, partly because I'm like the first daughter, you know, in my family. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility, and the oldest child. But also because I remember a lot of these meetings going around circles and circles and circles. And I always had to be the one that pushed to make a decision. No, we have to decide something, and we have to have a plan. And so then all of a sudden people, you know, thought, well, you always helps us to develop the plan. So you have a skill that maybe you should be the one that runs the organization, and the rest of us have different roles. And so I will say like that, you know, it happened at the beginning. But I will say that there's so many roles for movements. If you're a communicator, if you're an artist, if you like to write, if you're a poet, if you like, you know, fundraising, if you love to host events, there's a lot of work around community engagement. If you love teaching, there are different roles. Movements need everybody. All of us holding different roles, and not everybody has to be a community organizer, not everybody has to be an executive director. And so I think it's really, for students and for young people, try different things, see where you find the joy, and follow that voice. Follow that feeling in your heart, and you'll find your role.
And okay, question over here.
Hi, Professor Jimenez. My question is, what advice do you have for immigrant students who are, you know, as today's political climate gets worse and more divisive, what advice do you have for us to remain hopeful when things are discouraged and we become more and more consumed in depressing media? Where do you draw your faith from?
Oh, this is such a good question, because I think we are going through a very difficult time of so much human suffering in this moment. And it's really easy, I think, to feel despair and, you know, hopelessness. But what I have learned is that it is in community that you find hope and love, and where you find the answers. And I'll share this with a little bit of a story of why I'm saying this. In the 2016 election, you know, Trump opens up his candidacy, calling all immigrants rapists and making it really clear that if he was to become a president, criminalizing immigrants will be top of the agenda. I never thought that that could actually become a reality, and he did. And when he did, I was really paralyzed by the news. I was in Washington, D.C. in a community gathering. We had gathered all of our volunteers that had worked to get people out to vote. And when it was late and almost the morning, and it was confirmed who the person was that had become the new president of the country, I paralyzed because I immediately knew what it will mean for immigrant communities. And I had a plan. We had developed a plan. We knew that if Hillary Clinton would have won, we had a plan. And if this other candidate would have won, we had a plan. But I froze, and I froze because I had a lot of fear of what was to come. And I wasn't wrong. The Muslim ban happened in the first week of that administration. Turning every undocumented person into a priority for deportation became part of the law in the first week of the administration. So I had reasons to be afraid. But in that moment, what moved me from my place of despair and fear is that people in the community started to gather and sing a song. And they were singing a song from the Civil Rights Movement, a freedom song. And they reminded us that we know that if we work together, we will protect each other and we will be able to do work to protect our communities too. So when we feel hopeless and despair in isolation, you will continue to feel that. But if you're in community, you will find the answer and the support. And many of the ways in which we were able to fight back many of the attacks under the Trump administration came from being in community with undocumented people and allies across the country. And we were able to protect many people, but also deal with a lot of defeat. But I will say that the strength and the hope for me always comes from community and being in community with folks that share those values and that support and love for each other.
Other questions? Looks like Ari in the back.
So I recently discovered a friend who recently discovered that his citizenship may be under question. He basically had his citizen sped up without his knowledge. He was very young. And now he keeps it to himself. He hides it. And he's always worrying that what would happen if it ever came out. And I'm sure that's the fear of a lot of undocumented immigrants, keeping that in. What would your advice be to him moving on, trying to keep that secret?
So it's so powerful that you're asking this question for your friend, because I will say that for me, the question to you is, what are you willing to do for your friend? What can you do for your friend who also needs you in this moment? One of the things that for young undocumented people, and for all people that live in fear of all kinds for various reasons, it's feeling alone. So one thing that you can do is remind your friend that he's not alone, that he has you and other folks in the community that will support him and that love him. That's number one. I think that the most important thing to be able to move from a place of fear to a place of belonging or a place of power is to first not being alone. So the more that you can support your friend and other community members and family and friends can support your friend, that's the most important thing that you can do to be able to support the journey, which is a really scary one. That even though you see a lot of undocumented people saying, I'm undocumented and unafraid, there's also a lot of newer generations that are afraid, and they have reasons to be. And not everyone may be ready. Your friend may not be ready to say, I'm undocumented, this is my story. But having a community of support will go a long way. And number two, he has organizations here on campus. I know that there are dream chapters. across CUNY. There are organizations in New York that support young undocumented people, like the New York State Youth Leadership Council. There's United We Dream that he can be part of. And those will be community and spaces of support where he can find community and also, over time, find his own voice. And a community that will fight for him if there's anything ever that may happen to him because of his status.
Time for one more question. Up here, Professor Fuentes.
Thank you, Professor Jimenez. This is a pleasure and an honor to see you speak at our college, and thank you for coming back to your community. But I want to say a comment to your student that just asked the question. We also have the Office of Immigrant Affairs in New York City, in the mayor's office, and the director of this office is a Latino who was undocumented, right? Manuel Matos. And he has services and counselors, and we have an office here, and we could help you, at least orient your friend where to get those services and support. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Professor Fuentes. Yeah.
Hi. So throughout your journey of being such an inspiring leader, were there any obstacles or people that were against what you were rooting for, and how did you overcome that?
All the time, throughout the whole journey. Yes, I think, there were sometimes even people within your own efforts where you're trying to advance change disagree with you and may become an obstacle. As I was alluding to earlier, within the immigrant justice movement, having just a lot of disagreement and animosity, and people saying, no, young people should not move, to push President Obama on the DACA program, and opposing. And then, you will have people who are your opposition, your legitimate opposition, that disagree with you, that actually believe we should deport people, and young people shouldn't, like me, and communities like me shouldn't be here. So that's definitely always been part of the journey and the challenge. But what's really gotten me through that challenge is being a student of history and looking around at what other people in our community are doing. So number one, and being a student of history, I know that many social movements in this country, and I alluded to how the AIDS movement and the civil rights movement inspired the immigrant youth movement, they were told no many times. They were met with violence. They were met with repression by our government, by other communities. And nonetheless, they kept pushing back and fighting for a vision of the country that was more just. And so I knew that I became part of a lineage of people that will take a lot of risks and that would not accept no's to be able to change this country. Number two, when I looked around, and I will see communities fighting, racial profiling from the police, deportations, being exploited in the workplace, and organizing, and asking for better wages. People that may not have even had the, in some ways, privilege of knowing English or knowing their rights or having an education like me, that they were also fighting the odds and continuing their work. So that to me was always an inspiration to not take no for an answer. And for young people who have a lot of aspirations and visions of freedom and equality, we are going to get told no a lot. And if we were to believe that, we wouldn't have a lot of the changes that we've had and that we've seen in this country. I think of the young people that were part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the Civil Rights Movement. So we are going to face that. But I think not taking no for an answer and finding power and supporting your community and knowing that you're part of a long lineage of people that have fought against injustice could be a really powerful force to sustain you through the hard moments of pushing through the challenges.
Before we finish, I want to ask you to take the last piece of Professor Khalil's question about the arc of your career. which in the last piece was coming back to CUNY. And one of the things that I want to make sure is not lost on anyone here is the thread of CUNY through your life. CUNY is a place where I believe you've earned 2 degrees, and now you've come back to. And I wonder if you just talk a little bit about not just what, being part of a university has meant to building a movement, but being part of this university system. And Cristina was recently named the co-chair of Leadership for Democracy and Social Justice, which is a brand new institute here at City College and at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies that has opportunities for our students. And I wonder if you might kind of tell them a little bit about that and tell them how you're thinking about where CUNY fits into this project of making change in our world.
Thank you for bringing us back to that question. I had a professor in Queens College who was teaching global literature. And her name is Ana Maria Flores. My understanding is that she teaches now at BMCC. And I want to name that as someone who was born in Ecuador, I came from a place believing that what colonialism does to somebody's mind and heart is to believe that you're less than the colonizer. And in Ecuador, the way that looked like is that anyone that was indigenous or looked more indigenous and less European was considered less than. And you grow up sort of like wanting or desiring to be more European looking. And, and part of that is colonialism, part of that is internalized anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. But of course, I didn't have the language to, be able to describe that. So I came to this country believing in that many ways and feeling like that in many ways. And I remember walking into that class and our professor introduced us to Gloria Sandua, to Sandra Cisneros, to books like This Bridge Called My Back. So a lot of radical feminist writers, Black and Latino women, and Chicanas. And I remember one of the classes, she really spoke about what happens to the colonized mind and definitions of beauty. And she looked at me and she said, you have a beautiful indigenous face, but in dominant culture, that's not defined as beautiful. And in that moment, I was both shocked, but also why do I feel shocked that she said that to me? So I went to her after class and I said, I did not feel comfortable about that. And she said, why? And I was like, oh, well, because I guess I feel like that's an offensive comment. Because I was raised to believe that was an offensive comment, that if I looked indigenous, it was something that was considered less than. And that was an opening for me to get into the literature, to really go under the wing of this professor and learn to love myself. And to learn the impact that colonialism has had in my mind, in my heart, and in my family, and that trajectory. And so when I let go of that, I wanted to share that for me, that to my point that it's so important to love ourselves because that's where it stems from, that if we love ourselves, we're able to love fellow humans around us for who they are, and regardless of where they come from. That the impact that she had in my life, and through her I also read many from many activist writers, she helped me see, and then connected that to my political science professors who were talking about the threats to democracy in the early 2000s. All of that, to me, made the college experience such a critical one. And so for a lot of young people out there that may be debating, is the college education worth it at this moment? Yes, because it was in CUNY and in a higher education institution that my heart and my mind were transformed, that I learned to love myself, and that I learned about my roots, where I come from, my history, and the history of this country, and that shaped me into who I am. And that's what institutions should be doing. Every higher education institution should be doing that, to really expand and support that growth of heart and mind of students. So because of the impact that CUNY had in that way, in addition to the support to my activism, for me, finding the opportunity to apply for the distinct, and I was so nervous, I didn't know. I was like, could I be considered a distinguished lecturer? I don't know. But after 20 years of running an organization and be part of the movement, I wanted to take some time to reflect on the lessons and to be able to share the lessons with newer generations of young people. And this was the perfect opportunity that came my way, and despite the fear of perhaps being rejected, I apply at the encouragement of many colleagues. And so for me, it really became an opportunity to be able to do and support the growth of the students and empower the students in this institution, because I believe the present and the future leaders of our city, of our state, and of our country who can make this country better are here. You're sitting here. They're sitting all across our campus and across CUNY institutions. And the same transformation that I was able to go through and the empowerment and the support is what I want to be able to give back to the newer generations of folks here at the institution.
Thank you. Cristina, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for being part of CUNY and for making such a difference in our world. Everybody, Cristina Jiménez Moreta. Thank you. Thank you for being here.